Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Triple F podcast, Faith and Family First, where Jim Hochberg and I are going to be discussing the decision that came down from Dobbs last week and the absolute hysteria that is taking place across the nation. So let's chat about that. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eva, how's it going? What a week, huh?
What a week. Okay, so for our listeners and our viewers, understand that as you're listening to this, it's been about a week since the Dobbs decision has come down, maybe a little less than a week, but I know that all of you have been listening to what's been being said on the news. I know that you're watching what's happening on social media, you're listening to your friends, and I want to start the show with something interesting that happened to me. So in our office, we got a very interesting message from a listener who was a little angry about Hawaii Family Forum's position, and not only Hawaii Family Forum's position, but the nationwide Family Policy Alliance, which we have a nice partnership with Focus on the Family. So because of that, we had a listener call in. I shared the message with Jim because I thought Jim would find it very interesting. So Jim, why don't you share with our listeners and our viewers what the message was?
Sure. So the area code was 206, which is Seattle, Washington, which I thought was kind of interesting because Planned Parenthood in Hawaii includes the Pacific Northwest, which includes Seattle. So my thought was somebody from Seattle that supports Planned Parenthood in Seattle and Hawaii in the Pacific Northwest decided to send you a nasty voicemail. So I called the number because of what she said. I wanted to, quiz her a little bit because it didn't make a lot of sense. But I left 2 messages so far and she hasn't responded. And the interesting thing is, she had an extension that was 6,700 and something, 4 digits of a extension. The phone number answering system offered no opportunity to type in the extension to go directly to the person's phone. So I'm not sure what's going on over there, but it's different.
So what was the hate message?
So if I can remember, because it really didn't make a lot of sense, it was that the Geneva Convention makes it a crime against humanity to, quote unquote, force birth, close quote. And therefore, being violators of that convention, Hawaii Family Forum, and all the Focus on the Family friends that support Dobbs are now, I forget what the word, hate organizations, I forget, something like
yes.
that. Yeah. Kind of the thing that the Southern Poverty Law Center goes out of its way to label conservative organizations, because when you believe that life isn't life and marriage isn't marriage and men aren't men and women aren't women, then you kind of have this skewed understanding of what hate is, and you apply that skewed understanding to people that you disagree with. That seems to be what's going on. That's what I think she was doing.
Now, the reason that I started with that, because we are going to talk a little bit about the Dobbs decision and what that means for Hawaii, but the reason I started with that is because what's happening across the nation is that any list that has all of the pregnancy resource centers, the pregnancy medical centers, any list that Planned Parenthood and their cronies are finding, they're targeting these centers using these lists. And so we're trying very, very hard to stay in contact with the pregnancy resource centers right here in Hawaii to let them know that we've got their back. I mean, we're not police organizations. We can't go down there and protect them, but knowledge is the best way to arm yourself for this craziness that's out there. But so let's go to the Dobbs decision, Jim, because as an attorney, I know that you were waiting.
You're not an attorney.
No, I said you as an attorney. Jim
No, you didn't. You said, as an attorney, I know something. You're not an attorney, but go ahead.
I said, Jim Hochberg, as an attorney, I know that you were waiting for the Dobbs decision to come down because you wanted to see it. You didn't want to react on something that was leaked, because as you mentioned in our prior shows, it could change. But one of the things you were waiting
It
to
did
do
change.
and it did change, which was a good thing that we didn't overreact based on the first draft. But I think one of the interesting things is, well, first of all, how many pages is this wonderful decision?
Well, it's 213 pages, but even more first on the Dobbs before we get into the text is, if anybody listening or watching this is pleased that the United States Supreme Court in the Dobbs case struck down Roe v. Wade and Casey as not constitutionally erected, they need to remember that these judges are on the Supreme Court because they were both nominated by President Trump, but also because they were confirmed by the United States Senate. In a couple of months, there's going to be some voting on senators, and in 2 years, there's going to be some voting on senators and the presidency. And it is imperative that we use the information we have about candidates. How do they view life? How do they view family and parents and children and those things? We need to vote for people who will take our interest at heart when these cases come up, which means we have to elect US senators that will confirm pro-life, pro-family, conservative Christian values judges, and we need to elect presidents that will nominate those kind of judges. It goes back to what we talk about: vote your values, vote your values, vote your values.
And we're not alone on that. If you're listening to what people that are opposed to the Dobbs decision are doing right now, is they're encouraging the same thing. They're encouraging people to show up and vote, so that they can get more people in Congress that could maybe potentially stack the Supreme Court or whatever it is that they want to do. So you're not doing a call to action that is also not being done by the other side. So yes, if you're listening to this, just know that voting for this next election is going to be very, very important.
And remember that if the 6-3 decision to uphold the Mississippi law in Dobbs had 6 conservative justices willing to uphold it, there were 3 that wanted to strike it down as unconstitutional. And their main argument was, you can't get rid of abortion. Women need it to be successful women. We've had it for 50 years. During those 50 years, all those aborted babies freed the mothers that previously were carrying them so that they could have successful, happy lives. Those 3 judges are still on the court, and they came from presidents and senators that do not respect life. And we have to remember that.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because what's fascinating is a lot of legal eagles who have been studying the Dobbs decision and the dissenting opinion we're all saying that the dissenting opinions were more just, they weren't really legal. They were more like just, we support abortion and this is a horrible decision, but they were looking for the legal nuggets and there weren't really anything. What's your opinion on that?
Well, the only legal argument that was made by the dissent and by the pro-abortion people in the news is the Starry Decisive argument. And that is that in order for society to remain stable, the people in society need to be able to trust that decisions that were made by the Supreme Court in the past and by lower courts will remain the law of the land, so that they can order their lives according to those decisions. And generally speaking, in a federalist society like we live in, that's a good idea. But sometimes when the Supreme Court makes a decision, it's wrong, and it takes 50 years to realize it, like Dred Scott: once a slave, always a slave. It doesn't matter what state you can escape to, you get sent back. Like Plessy versus Ferguson: separate but equal is okay. So bad decisions do get made by courts, including the United States Supreme Court, and decades later they get overturned because they were wrong the day they were made. It just took the majority of judges on the court, based on the voting of the people voting in between, to see and enforce the true constitutionality on the issue.
Now, I do want to stick to the Dobbs decision, but it is interesting over the last few days, Jim, that there's been other Supreme Court decisions that have also been good decisions for the conservative base. You know, there was the one about the Second Amendment, and then there was one that was just recently released this week that basically protects Coach Kennedy.
Correct. He was a public school football coach. And after games, he would go to the midfield line, 50-yard line, and he would kneel and quietly pray. And over years, some students from one team, students from both teams would gather with him and silently pray. And what I understand is an opposing team's coach thought that was a really cool thing and mentioned it to the school superintendent, who apparently thought it was a bad thing and told him to stop, and he wouldn't stop, so they didn't renew his contract, so they effectively fired him. And he brought the claim 7 years ago, and it took 7 years to be vindicated. I'm not sure what kind of next step for him there is. There may not be, but there was another third case other than the Dobbs case, and that was before the Second Amendment case. There was a case out of the state of Maine that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, if the government is giving money to go to private schools, they can't withhold the money because the school of choice for the family is a religious school. And it's amazing that in 2022, some state governments would think that it was a good idea to discriminate on the basis of religion like that. But I'll tell you, the Hawaii Constitution has a similar provision.
Well, for our listeners and viewers, Hawaii Family Forum submitted an amicus brief on the Coach Kennedy case. And if you want to go to our website at hawaiifamilyforum.org, it is there if you want to take a look at it. So we are part of the Family Policy Alliance. So we are rejoicing in that decision as well as the Dobbs. But okay, so Jim, going back to the Dobbs decision, which is the one that's really important, I think what I'd like to do is, rather than go through the whole decision, because that would take us a couple of shows to get through all the pages, is I want to get your opinion on some of the false assertions that are being made by Planned Parenthood out there, because I want to get our listeners and our viewers ready to have these conversations with their family. And one of the first ones is that now that Dobbs has been decided, you're going to have people, legislators, the courts going after same-sex marriage. They're going to be going after access to contraceptives. They're going to be keeping women who need medical procedures because of ectopic pregnancies or because of incest and rape, that all of these bad things are going to happen. So I'd really like you to address those type of arguments that we're hearing right now.
Well, the reason they're making those arguments is what the Supreme Court ruled is 5-4. It's interesting. There's a 6-3 on upholding the law from Mississippi, and there's 5-4 because Chief Justice Roberts did not agree with the other 5 on overturning Roe. He wanted to say that we didn't have to overturn Roe to say the Mississippi law with a 16-week protected pregnancy is constitutional, but I don't see how those fit together. But anyway, because there were 5 justices that wanted to overturn Roe, you got to know the reason. And the reason is, what they said is, when Roe was introduced and the opinion was published, it was just flat constitutionally incorrect. And that's why it has to be overturned, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says there's a right to an abortion. And in order to uphold a right to abortion, abortion has to be something so baked into the tradition and history of our country at the time the Constitution was written. And if you're going to use the Civil War amendments at the time they were passed, that we have to have it now because it's part of the history and tradition of our land. And it just never has been. Never was until 1973.
So, but Kavanaugh, he made a point.
Because they've gone back and said it was wrong when it was done, a whole bunch of cases have followed the logic of Roe and Casey for other things. the same-sex marriage and this transgender things or the privacy. And Roe based its arguments in part on the contraceptive case that was 100 years before it. And so what the chickens with their head cut off, Henny Penny, or whatever the kid story is, or running
the sky is
around
falling,
scaring all the listeners that will listen to them. Oh, the next thing that's going to happen is you're not going to be able to have contraceptive because that right to privacy is now gone. But it's not. They're not telling the truth, because what Justice Alito said in the text of the opinion, I think it's like on page 7 or something, with the 5 justices overturning Roe, he said, we differentiate all those other privacy rights established under the privacy and the 14th, 15th Amendments of the Constitution from abortion, because abortion is the only one that kills somebody. And that this line of argument is not applicable anywhere else. Now, in Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion, he agreed with the 6-3 and the 5-4, but he wanted to write a separate opinion saying, but I think even though we're saying that the argument for abortion doesn't apply to those other things, we should look at those other things to see whether the tradition and history does cover them or not. So all he's doing is saying, as one of the oldest serving Supreme Court members, I'm willing to look at this issue in future cases. Number one, nobody else signed on with him, so he's by himself. And number two, I don't know how much longer he's going to still be a Supreme Court justice, but if he's the only one out of the current 9 and he does retire when we have a new president, at best there will only be one new one that thinks that way. So it's probably not going to happen for 50 years or 40 years or 30 years or whatever, 10 years, whatever, or maybe never.
And I'm glad you said that, because what you did is you gave our listeners and our viewers a way to have the conversations with people who disagree with them. For instance, even if, and I know that the way that you described that is exactly correct. So thank you for doing that. I think it was helpful. But even if there was a chance that they were going to try to overturn these things, people have to remember that the Supreme Court doesn't create law, it interprets law. So even if people wanted to do that in their states, there's a process, right? So some state decides we're going to outlaw contraceptives. It would have to move through their legislative process, right? So
Correct.
they would have, their legislators would have to vote on it and pass it. And ultimately, if it did pass, which I don't see it happening at all. I don't see it happening in any state, actually. Even in the red states, I don't see them trying to outlaw contraceptives. I don't think there's enough support to
let
do so.
me answer it. This is the answer that people can give to that. Look, Maryland was called Maryland because in the colonial times, it was a Catholic colony. The Catholics are the only church that really oppose any kind of artificial birth control or insemination. And Maryland isn't even going to pass it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very important thing. So when people start doing their henny penny thing, the sky is falling, just to remind them that there's a process. The Supreme Court took one decision, which was the decision on Dobbs, and they made their judgment on it. They would have to take up another case on one of these other issues, right? If that was the case.
Actually, no. The legislature passes it.
Right.
Opponents to the legislation file a federal court lawsuit in a state, which has something that happens over some period of time, which gets appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals, which does something over some period of time, which they ask the Supreme Court to take, which the Supreme Court does not have to take. How long? When was the last Supreme Court case on abortion after Casey? It's been forever.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
So I would say to people that are worried about the contraceptive thing, you don't have to worry. Just give AOC a call. She'll give you the new deadline on climate change wiping us out. That's going to happen first.
Well, and I think that's the other thing that has been kind of stressing me about the decision, Jim, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this too. So you have congressional leaders, and people like Nancy Pelosi, people like AOC, even the president of the United States came out and said that a constitutional right has been stripped. And they made it sound like that this Supreme Court's decision has done something so horrible and they've done it against what was written in the Constitution. But if you go back to the Roe decision and the Casey decision, wasn't that an interpretation at that time of the Supreme Court on what the Constitution had? Because didn't they kind of draw straws?
I think the better way to approach that issue is to say, look, Roe was just like Dred Scott. Dred Scott said, if you're a slave, it doesn't matter if you get into a non-slave state, you're still a slave. That was overturned because it was bad law. Roe, creating a so-called right to abortion that's not in the Constitution, has been overturned because it was a bad opinion. It created law without constitutional foundation. It's the same as the slavery overturning. And if you put that to people, hopefully it kind of makes more sense.
Well, I'll tell you, while our side is rejoicing on the great decision, and while the other side is having a major meltdown because of the decision, I think what's scaring me, people call the office, they email, they go, hey, what does this mean for Hawaii? And I think everybody's done a good job, regardless of side, saying, look, Hawaii's not going to change that much.
Actually, everybody hasn't. Our congressional delegation was henny penny. Oh, this is discriminating against women. Well, just 3 weeks ago, they didn't know what a woman was.
Yeah, I think.
And what they should have said, instead of driving division between people in our lovely state, those congressional leaders should first and foremost have said, look, people in Hawaii that we represent, you don't have to get upset. Because just like the governor of New York and the governor of California told their citizens, nothing's going to change here on abortion. We're covered. You don't have to worry.
Well, I'll tell you what is going to change. And I think people on our side really need to be prepared for this, is that in red states where they are, where trigger laws have happened, or where, they're getting ready to outlaw abortion, or whatever it is they're going to be doing in all these states. You have all the blue states like New York and California, and Hawaii likes to do what California and New York does, is now you have these companies that are offering these all expense paid trips to go to these blue states to have abortions. And what's interesting is that money is not coming from individual people's pockets. Planned Parenthood is not paying for that. It's you and me. It's the taxpayers that are going to be paying for these women to be flown to neighboring states to get abortions. And I think we should be very, very concerned about that.
Be careful, because you started that thinking with the statement that businesses are doing it.
Well, there are businesses.
Businesses are not the government. Businesses don't directly get our tax money. If the government's paying for it, they're using tax money.
Well, it's both.
We do have Hyde amendments that prohibit that. Private companies are using private money that they can do whatever they want. But then again, as we have that show with ADF on the freedom score of businesses, the 50 top 500 companies, if they aren't defending different philosophies in their workplace and in their commercial environments, then we should not hold their stock. We should sell their stock and that kind of stuff. That would apply to this. If you don't like that Amazon or Pepsi is giving money to people to go get abortions in other states, sell your stock. Invest in companies that you do like.
Yeah, so that was the point I was making. Yes, there are states that are saying that they're going to be doing this. They're going to be providing this opportunity. And there are businesses that are coming out saying they're doing it. And that was the point I was going to make, is that if you're shopping at Amazon or Walmart or whatever, and you find out they're going to be using their money to do that. But I guess my bigger question is this. They must not be worried that there's going to be a lot of women that are going to be accessing this. Otherwise, I don't know that they'd be wanting to lose revenue.
That's probably true. And that also begs the question, with Planned Parenthood supposedly closing down a bunch of their operations, well, I think they should stay open and do all those mammograms they said they were doing. Why are they closing if 3% of their work is abortion work? Oh, wait, you mean maybe they weren't telling the truth?
Well, you make a good point. And this is one of the things I have a friend that's a very strong abortion supporter, and she's really mad. We were having a discussion, and I said to her, why can't we coexist? If it's truly about choice, right? Let Planned Parenthood do what Planned Parenthood's going to do. I don't support that. So I don't want people saying, well, you want Planned Parenthood. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if Planned Parenthood wants to do that, they do their business. Why can't the resource centers do their business? Why can't that be a choice too? Adoption and, you know, getting assistance from whatever faith-based organizations are out there for a woman facing an unplanned pregnancy.
Well, but those choices are there. So what did your friend say?
Well, she thinks that that the pregnancy resource centers are fake centers, and you know the typical talking points, right? If you go to Planned Parenthood or any one of these organizations that support abortion, they don't support the pregnancy resource centers. They think they're fake clinics and all that kind of stuff. And you know, I think very shortly we should probably have on our show some of the women that work in the pregnancy centers, and so that people can know exactly what they do. And if you go to hawaiifamilyforum.org, we're going to be posting a very comprehensive pregnancy resource list, so you can find out what resources are being done by the pregnancy resource centers. If you are somebody who is considering voting for whatever candidate, make sure you find out how they stand on these kind of issues. Hawaii Family Forum will be producing our primary voter guide. And so if you sign up for our alerts at info@hawaiifamilyforum.org, once we get that voter guide done, you'll get it. Well, so Jim, in this last couple of minutes, what is your final thoughts?
Well, you know, we really have to vote intelligently. We cannot wait until we get our ballot and the day that we're going to fill it out, decide, okay, I'm going to pick people to vote for. What we have to do is when an election year starts right after New Year's, we need to start thinking, who is it I want in office on my ballot? I got to go start helping them. I need to convince good people to run if they're not even thinking of it themselves. I need to help them get elected. Waiting until your choices are set because the primary is over, waiting until the general ballot's in your hand and you only have those choices, you kind of blew most of it, because chances are, at least here in Hawaii, you've got a 50% chance or less that one of your two chances for any seat shares your values. We got to ask them, what are your values? Why should I vote for you?
All right. Well, Jim, give a 30-second teaser for the show next week. We have Jeremy from Tedesco from Alliance Defending Freedom. So if they tune in next week, what are they going to get?
Well, they're going to hear about this Fortune 500 company project ADF rolled out to let people like me and you tell our retirement money managers, I want you to tell this company to be more open-minded, free speech for everybody, or I'm pulling my investment out.
Great. Well, we thank you for joining us today. Make sure you like, you subscribe, and you share this video with your friends, and give it a thumbs up if you can. It helps the analytics and helps people find us. Join, support, and do all the great things that is going to get the word out on this show. And Jim, we will see you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.